Singing Dutchman Productions. Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends, old and new, and have honest conversations. Today is a celebration. This episode marks the 100th episode of Doug's Front Porch. And I knew this was coming, and I had to decide, how do I want to celebrate 100 episodes? And this is what I came up with. But first, a little history. Do you remember that very first episode? It was with my good friend Dustin Shirk, who I grew up with. And that came out on the 1st of May, 2020, at the height of the COVID pandemic. I've often talked about why I created this show as an opportunity to talk to people, because I love talking to people, but also because given that period in our history, we were all locked in our homes, kids weren't going to school, it was difficult to go out to eat, and I missed talking to people. So I started a hobby, a show that forced me to talk to people. And 100 episodes later, here I am. So this is what I decided for our 100th episode, this anniversary edition of Doug's Front Porch. I decided maybe it's time to turn the tables. And instead of me being the interviewer, it was time for me to be the interviewee. The next question was, who do I get to do that lofty goal? Because not everybody enjoys doing that type of stuff. And then I thought of my dear friend, who was also a guest on the show, episode 19 to be exact, back in February of 2021. And that was my friend and dear friend, Kevin Schock, who also at the time was my pastor. But Kevin is someone that has the ability to, of course, listen, but also engage. And I thought if I had to pick one person to interview me, that's who it was going to be. And I reached out to Kevin, and Kevin said, I would be honored. So the first part of the show, our 100th episode, is exactly that. My dear friend Kevin is now the other person behind the microphone, running the show and interviewing yours truly. And then we'll get to our 10 quick questions at the end. I'll break in and explain who's going to be doing that after my interview with Kevin. Enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to Kevin's Front Porch, a podcast where I invite friends old and new onto my front porch for honest conversation. Today's episode is someone that you all have been waiting a long time to get into the guest seat. Today, I'm talking with Douglas Madenford. Welcome, Doug.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. It's great to be on the front porch.
It's nice to have you on my/your front porch. You often, Doug, start this podcast every episode by talking a little bit about the person that you're having on, but I think that your listeners probably know quite a bit about you. That you're a teacher, you're a husband, a father, an advocate for Pennsylvania Dutch, and the not just the perpetuation, but the thriving of the language and the culture in which you grew up. So I think that I'm just going to jump into some questions because there are bound to be some things that the listeners want to know more about concerning you.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Normally you ask people about their childhood, but I have a specific question I want to know about your childhood. I'm sitting here talking to the man I know as Douglas Madenford. What are, in your mind, the formative events from your childhood that have helped shape you into the person you are today?
Formative events. Okay. Well, I think this is a plural in the sense of in the beginning. I think so. It was extremely formative to who I am today, given where I grew up and the environment that I grew up in. My brother and I were very blessed to grow up in the house and with the family that we had. Growing up on a small farm taught us everything from a work ethic, like there's stuff that needs to be done, we do it. the sense of how to care for the land. We were out picking weeds in the garden when we were little kids, and then picking eggs from the chickens and taking care of those animals. And then also from a very young age, learning how to butcher and how the things that we cared for would eventually help feed us, both the land and animals. And I think those were extremely important lessons to learn early on. We had loving parents, extremely loving parents, and four very loving grandparents that we spent so much time with, that I spent so much time with. So when I think about anything that I do today, especially the things you listed, like this Pennsylvania Dutch work, none of that would be here if it wouldn't be for my childhood that was spent with my four grandparents, who were all native Pennsylvania Dutch speakers. That was life for them, so it was just natural for them to pass these traditions and this language on to my brother and I. And all of those things combined really created the person that I am today. At least laid the absolute foundation for who I am today.
What is it about those important people? What was it about those important people that stuck with you? How did they, how did their behavior, their teaching, their presence with you uh, draw you in? I guess is the question I want to ask. Some kids reject the things that they learned in childhood. What was it about them that made you want to be like them, follow in their footsteps?
I think, well, specifically about my grandparents, and I guess my parents too, they were very, how do I explain this? They never treated us like kids, even from an early age on. We were included in everything. A lot of people that I work with who are learning Pennsylvania Dutch now always say the same thing. Oh, my grandparents only spoke Pennsylvania Dutch when they didn't want us to know what was going on, or what they didn't want us to know something. That was
Okay.
never my experience. That was never ever my experience. And I was alongside of them everywhere they went. So when we went places, we went. And whether it was visiting friends of theirs who were in their 80s or 70s, and I was a little kid, we were invited to the table at all times. We were never told to, oh, you can go play in the living room while we have this talk. We were never told to do that.
Hmm.
We were always welcomed into conversation and into whatever we were doing that day. And as I grew up, my parents were never helicopter parents either, in the sense that we have today. I was always given a sense of personal freedom to make the choices that I felt that I needed to make. And in the event that I made a mistake, made a poor choice, or made a mistake, then my parents were always there to correct that, or at least talk to me about it. But my brother and I were given a lot of personal freedoms as kids, and I don't know if that was just the way that I don't know if that was a conscious choice by my grandparents and my parents, but looking back on it now, that we were never treated like little kids. And even when we got older and we got into high school and middle school, the we were always treated like the adults in the room, which I never thought about it back then, but looking back on it now, I think that's also one of the reasons that I love talking to old people still today, because that was the audience that I always knew. But I didn't grow up with a lot of other kids. It was my brother and I. We never went to daycare. I never really got a lot of interaction with people my own age until I started going to school. And then it was only at school, so on the weekends or over summer break, we weren't going to camps. We weren't going to pool parties, because none of our neighbors had kids our age, even if we could have walked there or whatever. So my entire life has been spent with people always older than me. And if that's the only environment that somebody has, I mean, I think you're going to naturally gravitate towards that, or pick up whatever traits or actions that they're doing as part of who you are too. Um,
Hmm.
so
Yeah, and you did not have cousins growing up, did you?
I have zero first cousins. Yeah. So we didn't even have that. Like at the holidays, it would just be the four grandparents and my uncle, my mom's brother, but he was born paraplegic. He never got married, never had any kids. So like I said, I was always surrounded by people older than me. Always. My brother was the only peer, kid that I would have spent time with for the most part.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's I think Maybe that's one thing we have in common, not exactly the same, but a couple of things you said reminded me of things about our childhood and the sense of personal freedom. Um, I always tell people that when I learned how to ride a bicycle in the small town where we lived when I was about 5, 6 years old, it was like getting my driver's license. I could ride over to my grandparents' house that was a mile and a half away. My parents never made a big fuss about it. And my great grandmother lived on the other side of the town. I would ride to the pool, those kinds of things, as long as I was always checking in. And when I got to be a teenager, even that was still how my mom parented me. She didn't really care what I did as long as I told her where I was going to be and about what time she could expect me back. And then I was just given freedom. But also I think I did have cousins, but they all lived elsewhere. So for me and my sister, we had most of the audience of our grandparents, so to speak, and it was the same kind of way. We did things with them, and it wasn't like the kids go do something else and the because the adults have to talk. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and
Huh.
being a parent now is one of the things that I have struggled with, and I think I still do to a certain extent, is that I am not able to, just because of the circumstances, I'm not able to provide that type of childhood for my own children. And that's something that rubs me a lot because my kids are not able to spend these formative years with their four grandparents. Two of their grandparents have already passed away, and one grandfather lives in Texas, and the other grandfather lives 2.5 hours away. So that's been really difficult for me. That I haven't been able to provide that same uh, experience, because I know, looking back on it now, how important it was for me. I mean, we're still trying. Jess and I are constantly trying to provide a positive and good experience for our two kids as they're growing up. But that's one thing that does weigh on me a little bit, and I know I can't change that, and I should try to move past that, but it is something that I struggle with from time to time.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that. You don't live on a farm now, like you did. But I would say there are aspects of your little homestead that are farm-like. Um, the difference, though, is that, and tell me if I'm wrong here, it seems like Sunny Acres was a little island unto itself when you were growing up. You didn't have a lot of opportunity to travel. Well, like you said, your neighbors didn't have children your age or anything like that. Um, how how do you try to, I don't want to say replicate, but hand over to your children some of that experience of growing up on a farm or having that solid family unit?
Oh, yeah. Well, as far as the farming thing aspect goes, I mean, we've always, as soon as we bought the house that we live in, we bought it and we signed for it in May. And I think within a week or two, I was breaking ground for a garden, for a vegetable garden, because I can't imagine living somewhere without having a fresh tomato in the summer, or growing your own potatoes, or whatever vegetable we're talking about. I can't imagine a life without that. So we've always had a garden here, and we have pictures of our kids in diapers out in the garden, sitting on the soil, playing with the weeds. So I've tried to instill that in the sense of caring. Yes, we don't have any animals for them to care for other than a dog, but the idea of caring for the nature that we do have, those are things that, and hopefully they've learned some of this stuff. That the verdict's still out, but just being able to know how to plant something and how to care for it, and then to get the reward from it when the time comes, and that takes patience, that takes hard work, that takes a knowledge base to a certain extent, of course. And I'm hoping that these are things that I've passed on to my kids. I think we're still working on it, of course. But as far as that goes, yeah, the garden has always been a thing. And as you know, also in regards to the culture and language, I mean, that's something also that I've actively passed on to my children as well. Thankful that my wife from the start said this is something that she understands and wants to have happen as well, because I couldn't have done it by myself, by any stretch of the imagination. But Jess has always been 100% in, backing me up on all of this stuff, whether it's the garden or speaking Pennsylvania Dutch to the kids, and some of these other traditions that we do that were probably pretty foreign to her when we got together, and as we've, as our relationship continued to grow. So I mean, those are things I try to instill upon my own children, and try to get home to the motherland, so to speak, when we can, and
Yeah.
expose them to some of the stuff. Of course, I mean, my kids have helped butcher. We've been able to pass that aspect down. We have tons of pictures of little Oscar with his hands in a chicken cavity at a young age.
Oh my
So yeah,
gosh.
I mean, these are things that to the average person that might sound kind of weird, but it goes back to some of these things that I believe are important to know, and just this idea of carrying tradition on. As you know me long enough to know that tradition plays a very important part in my DNA, and I think it's important for me, as the generations that came before me pass these traditions on to their children. I feel it's expected of me to also carry on some of these traditions to teach to my children. So
Hmm.
yeah, I guess that answers the question. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
not an island. Where we live here, we are an island. In fact, we are in a certain aspect because, living in north central Pennsylvania, where I live now, and there aren't other Pennsylvania Dutch families around us. So, my kids are experiencing this, and they can't talk to anybody else, like their friends or anything like that, about it, because none of their friends have any of these traditions. They aren't exposed to this language. Where when I was a kid, I was in the middle of Pennsylvania Dutch country. So it was like the stuff that my family was doing, the kids that I went to school with and my friends, their grandparents were doing that stuff too. So it wasn't a foreign concept to them. They understood that stuff. But for my kids, if they go to school and talk about, oh, the Belschnickel came to our house last night, at Christmas time,
Yeah.
none
Sure.
of their peers have any, or most likely have no knowledge of that or any experience with it. So in that
Yeah.
sense, we definitely are an island here where we live. But yeah.
Yeah, they might get some exposure to the language just based on some of the Amish who live around here, but I know the dialect isn't uniform across all places and geographies. But yeah, I never thought about some of the cultural things are really there aren't a lot of people who welcome or well put up with the Belschnickel every Christmas season. Not in our immediate area, at least. Yeah, yeah. Um, the other thing I think about that is a lot different than when you grew up is that your kids have access to things like Instagram and YouTube as well, which, of course, you have used YouTube as a wonderful tool in your work. Um, but there are all kinds of other, not just when I say influences, I don't mean just bad influences. There's the ability to learn all different kinds of things. Um, as a traditionalist, Doug, we're sitting here, we're both in front of podcast microphones, wearing over-the-ear headphones, and talking to each other on a across a digital platform, even though we only live about 3 blocks away from each other. What role has technology played in perpetuating some of the traditions that you have that are important to you?
I don't think I could have done the work that I did. Well, I know I can't do the work that I do now without it. I could have been a Luddite from the start and said, I'm not embracing any of this technology and I'm not going to use it because that isn't what we did. But that would have been extremely myopic and nearsighted of me. I think the technology that we have today, especially social media, has given our culture, my culture, a platform that it never had before, and a voice that it never had before. For 300 years, our culture has been pretty insulated and standoffish to outsiders, traditionally. And I think those days are over for us as a culture. And if we want to survive, we have to utilize what tools are out there. So, I mean, all of the success that I've had would never have happened had it not been for things like YouTube or Instagram. If we talk about the Hiva Driva movie, for example, those German filmmakers never would have known who I was or found me had it not been for my YouTube channel. Or I'd never have been able to get all of these positive emails that I constantly get from people thanking me for the work that I'm doing because it helps them connect or reconnect to their own culture, because they don't have anybody left in their family that can tell them anything about what they, what is Pennsylvania Dutch. I'm Pennsylvania Dutch, but I don't know what that means. Can you help me out? I wouldn't be able to do any of that work if it wouldn't be for the internet and, things like YouTube and social media, especially like Instagram has really given me another platform too, to get information out to anybody, whether they're interested in Pennsylvania Dutch or not, or they are Pennsylvania Dutch or not. So yeah, I mean, technology, I wouldn't be sitting here today and not have had the experiences that I've had in my life, had it not been for the use of this type of new tech, the technology that we have today.
Hmm. Thinking about the work that you do, both professionally and avocationally, uh, what, how do you drive home the importance to your students or other people, the importance of learning our history and learning other languages?
Well, I mean, from the language perspective, I don't remember who said this. It might have been Goethe, but to speak another language is to have a second soul or a second identity. And you being someone that has learned other languages as well, I mean, that when you learn another language, it opens so many doors. It opens doors into a new culture, but it also opens doors into a new way of looking at the world and how to express looking at that world.
Yes.
Because every language has their own idioms and their own way of saying things. So that has definitely, I always share that story with people. But as far as the history thing goes, I always tell people, when you look specifically at like the Pennsylvania Dutch culture, so we've been here for 300 years plus in America. And if we don't learn what came before us, how can we help define who we are today? And then how can we take the experiences of the past to move forward? You can look at that in a couple different ways. You can look at it in the way that we're going to do exactly what our ancestors did because that was the right thing to do, and I'm going to. That's what I'm not straying from. That's one way of looking at how we perpetuate history or how we honor history. I think the other way to look at it, and the way that I tend to look at it, is that I draw on what's behind me, what has come before me. But then it falls to my shoulders and my generation's shoulders to continue that story. And the story might look differently. Cultures that don't adapt die. And yes, we've been around 300 years. And the reason we've been around 300 years and the reason our language has been around for 300 plus years in America is because even though most people see the Pennsylvania Dutch as this really stuck in time traditional culture, when you really look at it, we have constantly been bending and changing and adapting to survive in the era that we were in. Whether we look at the first era that came over in the late 1600s and early 1700s, how they had to adapt to a whole new physical world that they were entering into here in North America, to being part of a brand new country that our language and our culture wasn't the predominant language or culture, but somehow we were able to maintain our traditions while also assimilating into this new country that we helped form, to helping it survive, and then to helping it perpetuate into the 20th century. And somehow through all of this new technology, whether it was the Industrial Revolution or the Civil War, and we get into World War I and World War II, my culture and my language has always been able to shift to make sure that it somehow kept going. So when we look at it that way, I think the Pennsylvania Dutch are really progressive in that sense. Some of our beliefs are traditional and old-fashioned maybe, but our ability to adapt to whatever era we are in, we have constantly, generation after generation, proven to be able to do that. So I also share that story with people to think that, yes, the Amish are still driving buggies and have a horse. And you could say, man, that's so old. But at the same time, as well as I do, we can go into an Amish store around here in Pennsylvania, and they will have modern technology available to them that they are using to survive. Yes, in their home, there are certain rules, but outside of their home, it's not. And I think it's the same way for the Pennsylvania Dutch that aren't Amish or Mennonite. My grandfather and my great-grandfather, when tractors became a tool to use, they could have said, I'm sticking to the horse and plow, or I'm going to adapt with what's given to me to not only continue, but also hopefully to even do better and succeed more. So, and that's how I look at the technology we just talked about, with modern technology today. I could have said no to all this stuff, but where would I have been? Could I have continued to spread my gospel that I'm trying to spread or not? So, in that sense, history, but at the same time, you have to tip the hat, acknowledge what came before you in order to move forward. The one thing that just recently was said to me within the last 2 years that I just constantly comes into my head from time to time. I was interviewing here on the podcast Richard Mamana, and the work he does with cemeteries and old tombstones. And I asked him when he's on these cemeteries and he's standing in front of the tombstone of his ninth great grandfather, what does he feel? Or does he have somewhat of a religious experience? And this comment that he made just continually comes back to me. He said, when I look at that stone, I know that whoever's below me held the hands that held the hands that held the hands that held my hand. And that concept just absolutely resonates with me. And you've been here in where our studio is, and some people have seen this that watch the YouTube channel, but behind me on the wall are all old photos of my great grandparents, my great great grandparents, photos from their farming. And I specifically put all that stuff behind me on this wall because of the work that I do here, with this concept of, or this thought that everything I'm doing here, when I'm making these videos or when I'm doing the podcast or when I'm doing presentations, they're watching me. Yeah, their photos are watching me. And there's this sense to me that they're always behind me looking over my shoulder. And my hope is that they're continually nodding with agreement of what I'm doing to continue telling their story and continue telling our story. So
Yeah. Yeah, I know how important that is for you, to have that connection to your past. Uh, I had another question, but that last little segment of what you were talking about there really makes me want to ask another question that I was going to save for a little later. So I'm just going to go right to that. Anyone who knows you and has been physically at your house knows that the back porch is where we actually hang out, not the front porch.
you are
You have a
correct.
stoop, but the back porch is the gathering place. Nevertheless, you named your podcast Doug's Front Porch. Doug, what is the front porch for you?
So the reason I named it the front porch is because on the farm where I grew up, we didn't have a back porch. We only had a front porch. And that is where we gathered. That's where we sat on the rocking chairs. And when a spring thunderstorm or a summer thunderstorm was happening, that's where we sat and watched the lightning or heard the distant rumble. That is where we sat to tell stories. That is where we sat to catch up with people. That was the gathering place. And that's what any porch is to me. And I think, I started this podcast at the height when COVID had just broken out. It was like, well, it was June of 2020. We'd been locked down for 3 months or whatever. And I was missing that aspect of being able to sit down with people and talk because, as you know, and my wife will readily admit, I am an extrovert and I love talking with people. And naturally, that a porch for me has always been that point of, this is where people sit down. This is where you take off your protective layer of whatever you've been wearing all day to shield yourself from the ugliness of the world, and you can be yourself. And whether that's over a cold drink or a small meal or a big meal, but you are letting yourself be present in the moment. And you know as well as I do that when you and I are sitting physically on that back porch, the types of conversation we have aren't just about, oh, the weather was nice this week, or, hey, did you see the Phillies won another game? It's always conversation that has meaning and moves people in certain ways. You think about some of the conversations that I've had physically on my porch with all different kinds of people. I think it's always made me at least a better person, or at least made me think about something in a way that I never thought about it before. So, I mean, it's a gathering point. It's a point of honesty. At least I try to make it that, whenever anybody comes to our house, I hope that they always leave feeling that they were welcomed and that they were valued. Because that's what my front porch did on our farm growing up.
Sure. Okay. Um, I think I wanted to talk a little bit with you about what is we live in a culture where people don't take off that protective layer very often. How, and this is something I've been wondering about on my own for a while too. How do we how do we encourage that to happen? more often in our society.
So I'll equate this to my classroom. One thing that a lot of my colleagues will often say to me is, it really seems like the relationships that you have with your students are pretty unique. How do you do what you do? And when people first started asking me that question, my response was, I don't know. It just happens. And that was a naive response, but at the same time, that's how I felt when I said that. But looking back on it now, 23 years into teaching, um, the easiest answer to your question is you engage with somebody. Just talk. Talking alone will and listening, and that's the key too. Not just talking, but listening. Remember, we have 2 ears, 1 mouth.
Hmm.
So should we do twice the amount of listening as we do speaking?
Hmm.
But making somebody realize or know that they are being listened to is step one for me in any situation. So,
Mm.
yes, in my classroom, I do a lot of talking. I'm the teacher, that's the expectation. But I very rarely talk at the class. I am constantly talking to these kids. And it's building relationship. It's letting them know that, hey, he's actually talking to me. He's not just talking at me. He's talking with me or to me, asking questions. What are you doing this weekend? On a Friday. What are you guys doing this weekend? Or if I know something happened the night before, I mean, it was a sporting event or a musical or a concert, asking them those questions. Hey, how'd it go last night? Did you guys win? How was the concert? How was the attendance, et cetera, et cetera? How did you play? How did you do? Engaging in that conversation and letting people realize that they are being listened to, I think that's step one. And as soon as someone feels that or understands that they're in a space where they do feel that, then I think naturally you're going to take that, you're going to start to remove that layer. So creating a warm and welcoming environment. It sounds a little bit Mr. Rogers like, but it's a basic concept that I think all too often too in our society we don't do. I mean, that was the whole reason. One of the reasons I started this podcast was because back then in 2020, I felt that we weren't talking to each other anymore, and I felt that we were doing a grave injustice to our society and to our country. A democracy flourishes on people being able to talk to each other from all different backgrounds and from all different political bents. But as soon as we stop the conversation, we're in trouble. And we can fast forward to now 2025, and I think a lot of us can look at the society that we're in, and the same kind of worries maybe are raising among some people, these kinds of senses that we aren't talking to each other, we're talking at each other and not actually talking with each other. So I think that's how I go about it. I try to create an environment where I hope the person that I'm speaking with feels that it's the safe space. I feel safe here, I feel warm here, I feel like I can let my guard down because there's no reason for me to have my guard up.
Well, Doug, you've had me on the podcast actually twice now as a guest. Once to talk about me, and then once to talk with another guest and remind me of his name. His face is in front of me, but I can't think of his name.
Matt DeSantis.
Yes, Matt. To talk about religion and politics, which was a great conversation from my perspective, at least. I really enjoyed it. In my line of work, I have been having a lot more conversation with people and coming to the conclusion also myself that rebuilding community is what we need to do, not just in the church, but in all of society. And people do not let that protective shell come off very often, and they don't want other people to know about them, or they're afraid to let it happen. Um, and I think something that I've heard in my line of work that comes from an organization called the People's Supper, which I think is has a similar kind of goal as this Front Porch podcast does, is talking about brave space, not just safe space, but space where we can be ourselves and carry one another in conversation. Um, you also used another term. You talked about spreading your gospel, which is something that I do professionally, but also it's something that a community has to be built in order for that to take place. You can't just go out there and tell people, that learning Pennsylvania Dutch or learning about the culture is an important thing. You have to do this with people who have some kind of understanding of who you are and yeah, and what the importance of it is. When you've talked a lot about your avocational work, when it comes to your students, the kid who's sitting there in a German 1 class, or someone who is flirting with the idea of taking a higher level history class, how do you drive home to them that this is important work, even if it's not going to necessarily land them a job in a couple of years?
That is a great question. Um, because a lot of my job, because I teach the subjects that I teach, are driven by numbers. And if my numbers, because not every kid has to take a language at the school where I teach, and not everybody has to take that higher level history class that I teach. So if I don't get kids interested in signing up for those classes, my my job's in jeopardy, so to speak. I mean, numbers are
Mm,
important in the economic world that we're in right now in public ed. Numbers are important. And I never tell the kids that. It's not like, guys, if you don't take this class, Mr. Mainford's not going to be around next year. I never say stuff like that. I I don't know if I actively try to get them to take the classes. My expectation is that any kid that takes German 1, they're going to take German 2, and they're going to take German 3. And
okay.
I know that they don't. Every year the numbers get smaller, and that's natural. But my expectation always is, if you signed up for German 1, well, of course you're going to take German 2. Why would you stop? Um, so again, I try to create an environment in my classroom where a kid that's done with German 1, and maybe they never had any dreams of aspirations of learning German, they just took the class for whatever reason. They heard I was cool, or their friend said I was take his class, that at the end of German 1 they're like, I really enjoyed that. I'm going on. I want to do this again next year. And sometimes that's the case with some kids, and some kids say, "Oh, after a year, that's I'm done. I did it. Didn't enjoy it. Okay." I guess my answer is that I try to create an experience and an environment where somebody says when they're done with it, "I want more of that."
Mm, mm, mm.
I do that with my friendships too. I want my friends and our relationships from my side and their side to always be like, "I enjoy this. I want more of this." And I don't
Mm.
act. I just we tried. We try. I try. I think we all try to build relationships, or we should be building relationships where we constantly say that. And I know we don't, but maybe we should stop and do that more often, and actively, physically say, "What can I do to create an experience or an environment where somebody, when they're done, says, that was I enjoyed that. I want more."
Yeah, I don't think too many people are as thoughtful about it as you are.
Uh, that's probably the case, but I also think that deep down they are. Like, I mean, the average person, in my opinion, the average person has to, on some level, subconsciously or not, whenever, Kurt Vonnegut once said, whenever you're happy, stop and notice it, and you'll realize it's the greatest thing in the world. And
Yeah,
all too often, we don't. We don't.
yeah,
And
yep.
the one thing that you and I have often talked about, and I literally preach this to people, is that we as a society, and I truly believe this, we do not take the time to rest. And rest can be in a
Oh,
lot of different ways. It can be just sitting down and physically resting. But rest can also come, in my opinion, can also come in the form of community with others. And you're taking a break from the normalcy, your normal 9 to 5,
hmm.
the stresses of your regular life, and even if it's an hour a day, or for some people an hour a week, unplug, literally, physically, but also unplug, and in a non-literal way, unplug and take that time to rest and be in community with other people, or even with nature, or whatever you gravitate towards. I think we'd all be a much better place if we all did that a little bit more.
Yeah, I talk about it with people a lot in terms of we all know how to do, we don't know how to be. And I think that um that also speaks to what you say about rest. Rest is a state of mind. It's not the physical thing that you are or not doing. If, if mowing the grass is on your to-do list, you're going to do it. But if there's a day where you think to yourself, you know what, I'm just going to go out and mow the grass because I feel like doing it, that can be restful. It can be a completely different that you're doing the same thing, but you have a different mind frame about it. Um, but I agree with you that community, even for people who are not extroverts like you are, or I tend to be, um, it's renewing, it's life-giving. And I think people can engage on whatever level they feel comfortable, but I think denying ourselves community wholesale is never going to be a healthy thing. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Well, so I hear in your answer there, that your expectations are high. That's which I think is great. I know also from my line of work that if you're doing something with the goal of getting better numbers, getting more people to come, you're going to fail at it because that's not a goal in and of itself. That's a tactic. It's a strategy. But I'm really interested to hear you say that why wouldn't a German one student take German too? But I think if that's the environment you're creating, then it's going to create interest in whatever it is that you're teaching. Yeah.
I was giving a baccalaureate speech one time. I was honored to be asked to do it, and I didn't going into it. I was like, "What am I going to talk about?" And we were in a time period there. It was a couple years ago when we were getting a lot of pressure from the state. We meaning education as a whole for these test scores that we have to have, and funding is tied to those numbers. And it was, I mean, it completely sickened me and disgust and made me feel dirty that my profession was being equated to how a kid scored on a biology test or how a kid scored on an algebra test. And I figured, and whenever I'm given a microphone, I'm going to use it. So I stood up in front of the senior class that year and their parents and family members for this baccalaureate address, and I told that story. I said, I don't know how many of you know this, but I get a grade too, just like all of these kids do. At the end of the year, my principal sits down and grades me. And a percentage of my grade is how these kids do on their biology test, their algebra test, and their literature test. And I teach German. I don't teach biology. I don't teach algebra. I don't teach literature. But yet my grade is made up of how these kids do on those tests as a percentage. And I said also a part of my grade for the year is how many kids failed my class, how many kids were there behavior issues in my classroom, all these things. And my principal was sitting right there, and I know this angered him, but I said to the audience, I said, none of that stuff care. I don't care about any of that stuff. I don't care about what you do on your biology test. I don't care about any of those things because when I grade myself as an educator at the end of the year, I will have succeeded in my job if every kid that walks into my classroom leaves my classroom at the end of the year being a better person. They might not speak fluent German, their German might not be all that great, but are they a better person leaving my classroom? And if they are, then I've succeeded. And I don't think people were expecting to hear that because I don't think that's the normal. I think a lot of teachers feel that way, but I don't know if they'd ever say it. I said it. And it's true. I tell my kids that. When I have a kid that's struggling, I say, look, keep working at it. Maybe we'll get it. And if you don't get it, at least you tried, because some of that stuff is tricky. If you're trying to teach passive voice in German or subjunctive too, it's not the easiest thing in the world. And kids struggle. And the struggle is good. It's good for people to struggle. That's a whole nother conversation I can get into some other time. But that's how I grade. That's how I grade myself in everything I think I do, not just my classroom and my profession.
Hmm. I I hear in that answer that you do care about how those kids do in that biology test. Not from a sense of you better study hard and learn all the information, but it sounds to me like you're trying to form young people to always try their best, to always put forth an effort. And And that does have an impact. It does have an impact on everything that they do in life, not just how they perform in German or history.
I was
Yeah.
blessed, and we'll go back to the beginning of the conversation. I was blessed with family that instilled those ideas in me. And I know that a lot of kids coming into my classroom do not have those people in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Doug, that makes me think. I think one more question. Years ago, I met a colleague of mine who was in a position where he met a lot of people all the time and was always trying to get to know people, but didn't have a lot of time to do it because of the nature of his work. And so he always utilized what he called his form to get to know someone. And form stands for family, occupation, recreation, and message. Doug, what is your message that you want to give the world?
Oh,
Elevator
man.
speech length.
Well, so if I'm talking from Pennsylvania Dutch, I can give that. I can give the elevator pitch for that at any point. And I've done that many times on my YouTube channel and in the talks that I give. So I don't know if I want to necessarily say that again here. But
Yeah.
my elevator pitch, I think, to anybody, and as far as message, is a lot of things that we just talked about. Be in communion with people. Um, Show that you care, but actually do it. Don't just show it. Do it. Don't just say it. Do it. And never be afraid to be the person to pick up the broom. And I come back to that phrase a
Mm,
lot. No matter where you are in life, you can I would always say, my grandmother always said, never get bigger than where you're from. But I always like to think, and we say in Pennsylvania Dutch, the broom plays a very important role in the Pennsylvania Dutch culture in a lot of ways. But the person that picks up the broom is somebody that's not afraid to do the work necessary, but also no matter where they are on the ladder of society, we always equate that the janitor or the person cleaning as, on one of the lower rungs of society. Whether that's, why we do that, I mean, we can all talk about that, but never be afraid to be the person picking up the broom. That's my message. That's a message that sticks to me a lot.
thanks, Doug. Yeah. I think I think that's one of the things that binds you and me together is some of those messages that we've learned from a young age. Just a few weeks ago, I was taking recycling to a place where, a municipal parking lot in a nearby town and throwing our cardboard in there and stuff. And an elderly woman with a cane was getting out of her car and had this big garbage bag full of stuff that she was going to sort. And I said, ma'am, can I carry that for you? Oh yeah. Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. And then I noticed she was following me and I said, I can figure out how to sort your recycling. You don't have to come down here and do it. And she was asking me, are you serious? Really? And I said, yeah, it's only going to take me a minute. No worries. What I didn't say to her was when I meet my grandmother in the age to come, I will hear about it if I don't do this and if I ignore you. Um, and that's not the motivation for doing it that I'm going to hear about it if I don't do it. But that's the people that you and those are the people who raised us. And and I think that's a common thread that you and I see in our families and our life together and the work that we do. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate the invitation to come and interview you. It's always good to come up on the front porch, but usually I'm not in this seat. So I I really I I appreciate the honor, Doug. I'll say that. It's an honor to be up here on the front porch with
Well,
you.
I
Yeah.
couldn't think of a better person to have a conversation with in regards to this as we celebrate 100 episodes, because I knew you were going to ask questions that would make me think and engage in the tagline to the show, honest conversation, right? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you, and I'm honored that you decided to do this for me too.
Well, yes, I'm happy to do it. And I know that you're going to invite your friend Dustin up here to do the quick questions. But there's one quick question I want to ask you
Okay.
that is not one of the normal ones.
Ooh.
Um, but it was something that was really I was curious about. Uh, what other language would you like to learn, Doug?
Oh my, that's a great question. And I think about this, like if I had the time, would
Yeah,
there's
right,
so
right.
right, so there's a lot actually. I can't give just one answer. One that for some reason I would just love to learn is Welsh. There's something about the Welsh language and the Welsh culture, mainly because when I was in Wales, I fell in love with that place. So that would be a fun language to learn. Um, uh, man, yeah, I guess that'll be my answer. If I had to
Yeah,
pick
that's
one,
great.
be Welsh.
That's
Yeah,
great. Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
it's a great question.
Well, Doug, I appreciate the space that you make on the porch for me and for all of us who listen to this podcast. And thanks again for putting yourself in the guest seat, and congratulations on 100 episodes.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you, my friend. What a wonderful interview. Thank you so much, Kevin. As I knew you would, you'd make me think and you'd put me on the spot. Now it's time for the dessert, in which every episode, of course, ends with my 10 quick questions. And for this, I had to turn to somebody else that has had a very important part of my life. Yeah, I've known this person even longer than Kevin, and that is who was on the very first episode of Doug's Front Porch, Dustin Shirk. I've known Dustin since elementary school, and we're still really close. And I thought if anybody is going to be able to give me 10 quick questions, it has to be him. And I told him, do with it whatever you want. I sent him a copy of the 10 questions. I said, if you want to go in a totally different direction, go ahead. And of course, Dustin being Dustin, rose to the challenge. So enjoy Dustin's version of our 10 quick questions asked to me. And boy, are there some doozies in there. Enjoy.
Well, hey, everybody. This is Dustin Shirk here, and I am a friend of Doug's from Doug's Front Porch. And it is my pleasure to be the person asking Doug the 10 questions that you're all very familiar with at the end of his interviews. And I was lucky enough to be to have this honor bestowed upon me. And so everybody, welcome, and we're gonna get into it here. As I was telling our friend Doug here, we run the gamut of the questions here, from the absolutely absurd to the pretty darn deep. And so I hope you're all ready for some fun stuff. And actually, Doug, if it's okay with you, I actually have a couple of warm up questions that um, I was like, I thought that these were interesting to me anyway, and I know that they will be to you. We'll do two warm up questions if you're okay with that.
Absolutely, my friend.
Okay, so are you ready?
Yes, let's do this.
Okay, warm up question number one. You're walking down the hall and you see some students walking towards you. Do you say hello or do you say howdy?
It depends on the kids. If it's students that I know, I'll usually say something even more absurd than howdy. But if it's a kid that I've never had in class and they're making eye contact with me, then I usually say I've actually used howdy already. So yeah, that's I would go with howdy.
Yeah, that's so. Well, now I have to know what else do you say besides howdy? Because I say that, and especially the kids who don't make eye contact. And by the way, folks, if you don't know, Doug and I are both teachers. I'm also a teacher here in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. And when they don't look, because there are those kids who don't make the eye contact, and you're like, "Hey, howdy." So, what do you say besides howdy?
So if it's a kid that I don't know, I also will sometimes be like, I'll be like that right up there. Good morning to you, or how is your afternoon going? But if it's kids that I know, and I have the pleasure of having kids for like 3-4 years sometimes. So I like just like you, like I really know these kids. So usually I make fun of them. I mean, I bully them. I bully those kids in the hallway, 100%.
They need it.
Usually I can't get through. I start laughing by the time I get to the end of what I want to say to them. But sometimes I get the whole thing in before I start laughing. So
Yes, very good. All right, okay. Warm up question number two. This is the last warm up question. Okay, Van Morrison or Bob Dylan?
oh, come on, man. If like gun pointed to my head, it's got to be Bob Dylan. However, man, I do love me some Van Morrison.
Yeah, yeah. And you turned me on to that Astro Weeks for sure. And yeah, that was a question that I wrote down amongst others. I think I I think at the end of the day, I had about 27 questions, and
Oh my God.
so I whittled it. I whittled it down. Yeah. So I took this very seriously, as I do with most things.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. Here we go. We're gonna get into it now. Here's the serious
All right.
stuff.
Okay.
All right. All right. So, your spouse makes you a pie that you really like. As the week progresses and you open up the fridge, all of a sudden there's one piece left of this pie. Do you leave the slice or do you take it for yourself?
Oh, it's mine, baby. That's all
That's
mine.
your pie. What pie are we talking here?
If Jess is making it, she makes a really great version of my grandmother's lemon sponge pie that tastes just like my grandmother's, and it is so good. But it never usually lasts past 2 days. So, but yeah, I'm not gonna. There are certain things maybe I would let for other people, but if it's that, I'm taking it. So
You're not sharing it.
no,
It's yours.
no.
My man. All right. All right. Question 2. Tell me about a time that you made a mistake that really, like, recurrent thought in your head, and what did you learn from that mistake?
Wow. Oh man, there's gotta be. I know there's tons of of uh, tons of episodes over the years of teaching where I've probably have said, like, I gave a kid the wrong answer, and then I realized it later on, and that really bugged me, that I gave a kid a wrong answer. And I always, and I learned this from a professor I had in grad school. She was great about this. Whenever you asked her a question that she didn't know, she had a yellow legal pad next to her at all times in lecture, and she would write the question down. And I guarantee you, the next day you had class, she answered your question. She said, "Hey, I looked that up last night. This is the answer." And that taught me that lesson, that whenever my knee-jerk reaction should always be, "I'm not quite sure, so I'll check with it and I'll get back to you tomorrow." But there's been times where I know I've knee-jerk reacted an answer and then realized later in the day, like, that was wrong, and that always bothers me. And then I always go back and correct it. But professionally, those things bother me when that kind of stuff happens. So I guess that's my best answer for that one.
And you're not above an apology to a student, right?
No, I apologize to kids all the time.
Yeah, same. Yeah, yeah. All right, cool. All right. Do you enjoy any fictional stories? And if so, what are they? Because I know you're a big nonfiction guy. You're a big history buff, and I know that you get into a lot of the language stuff and all that, which is but as far as the cultural part of what you study a lot, so maybe from there. But yeah, any kind of fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge Kurt Vonnegut fan. I've been reading him since high school. I love his stuff. That's all fiction. I read poetry every once in a while. It's not something I do a lot. You're right. I mean, the majority of my reading is either nonfiction or historical stuff. But there's some great Pennsylvania Dutch authors that wrote some wonderful poetry and wonderful short stories, and I can get lost in those really quickly. But I mean, if you look at my nightstand, it's predominantly nonfiction right now, or it has been for quite a while, actually. So I don't read as much fiction as I should. I'll say that.
Do you have as far as Kurt Vonnegut, you got
I mean, this is a cop-out answer, but Slaughterhouse-Five was like, if anybody said, like, what book changed you? I don't know if that was one of your questions coming up or not, but I would have to, that probably would be it. That was the first book that I read, or one of the first books that I read that really made me think differently about a lot of things, about life, about the world. And actually Breakfast of Champions, a bunch of his books did that. Every time I read a Vonnegut, I guess that's why I kept going back, because every time I read another one of his books, it made me think about things differently. So yeah.
I think, and we had this conversation about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, that book too. Yeah, 100%.
Read that a few times. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Can you recall a dream that you had as a child that you still remember today?
I don't think so. I'm one of those people that actually usually remembers dreams. Like, I can wake up in the morning and remember the dreams that I had the night. Not every day, but often I can. And then like I'll be sitting at lunch and I can think back to that dream. but one specific from my childhood, I don't think I can. Can you?
Is that right? I do. I have one. Yeah. This is really silly. I was, God, I think I was like maybe, I mean, I was definitely before I was 10. And I had this vivid dream of being surrounded in a room by lobsters. And I was on a piano bench and they just kept trying to pinch me. And that's, yeah, I will never forget that dream. I don't know, as ridiculous as it sounds, but yeah, like, yeah, that's a dream that I
Do
just
you
remember.
have recurring dreams, or like dreams that not necessarily the exact same dream all the time, but the same kind of themes?
I don't. I know. And when you said about how you can usually recall your dreams, I usually can't. It's very rare that I can do that. My wife Jen is very much the opposite. She's like you. She dreams every night and she can remember it. That's usually a conversation we have every day. So, hey, what did you dream about last night?
It
But
might
no,
be
it's
that it might be that your sleep apnea is not allowing you to reach full REM.
I'm a terrible sleeper. I am horrible. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. All right. Okay. Let's see. Ooh, okay. This is a good one. All right. You're at an event, wedding or whatever, and there's a band or a DJ. What song comes on and you scream and have to run out to the dance floor?
Oh, okay. I thought you were gonna say which song comes on and you have to like run out of it because you hate it so much.
Oh no, like you love it so much, like you like almost like you're giddy as a schoolgirl, and you arms go up, and you're like, oh my god, and you run out there.
Boy, that's a great question. Oh, geez, I don't know. The song, I have to say this because I did preface this. The song that I absolutely hate that gets played at like every freaking wedding reception you go to is Celebration. I
Oh
can't
yeah,
stand that song. And as soon as I hear that, I go get another drink because
same.
I just can't stand that song. But a song that just absolutely makes me go to the dance floor. And I know Jess will listen to this at some point, and we don't go to enough wedding receptions and things like that anymore. But if a Frank Sinatra song comes on that we can dance to, then if I'm not pulling her out to the dance floor, she is absolutely pulling me out to the dance floor. And
Oh,
not that I'm pushing back from it at any stretch, because if you got like "Fly Me to the Moon" or a song like that comes on, then we're out there and we're dancing. Yeah.
cool.
That's not one I'm going
Yeah,
to throw my arms up and like scream, but that would, if a song like that comes on, then I get excited and I want to go dance. Yeah.
I think if "Jump Around" by House of Pain comes on, I think
That's a good, yes.
that's one. I'm just like, let's go.
Let's go.
We're jumping. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. That's true. That's true. I think too, like given our history, like if we were sitting around and we're at some bar and somebody hits the jukebox and some like '90s era ska song gets played, like we are off, we are out. We are absolutely out there.
Yeah, yeah. I think that feeling would be just absolutely magnified if you and I were together
Oh, sure.
with a couple of drinks. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And even when we can slow dance too, maybe.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Hey, you and me, Frank Sinatra, we've done it before. So
Yes. Yeah. No shame here.
no,
Um,
none.
so what is one thing that whether it's something daily or something every now and then that you're able to do, or something that happens that makes you feel the most alive or fulfilled, whether that's daily or yearly or something like that, something that you really like, man, I feel so much better after that.
So I'm going to give you a couple examples. There have been times where I've been playing music here in the basement, or I'll just be doing stuff with Oscar and Estella, and they'll start singing. Or they'll just start singing songs that I sang to them when we were kids. And I like, like we weren't singing Itsy Bitsy Spider, not in the Madenford household. They were getting sea shandies and they were getting all these like old American folk songs and stuff that like the typical kid isn't listening to. And my kids were singing those songs when they were 3, 4 years old. So there have been times like whenever they do stuff like that, that really gives me a shot in the arm. And I've been very blessed with the work that I've been doing with this PA Dutch stuff. Is I get regular emails from people that will just thank me for making these videos or posting these images, because it allows them to either connect or reconnect with their culture. And in some cases, I've had emails from people that said, "I watched your video on your word of the week, and I haven't heard that word since my grandfather when I was a kid, and that was 60 years ago. And when I watched that video, I felt like I was with my grandfather again. And that is when I get emails like that, that just, I mean, it's so fulfilling and so rewarding to know that the little silly stuff that I'm doing, you know, that is making someone have that kind of a visceral reaction and a positive reaction too. So I have to go with those two things, I think, for sure. And I mean, and you know this too, as an educator, I mean, when graduation, the end of the school year is always kind of weird because every kid wants to get out. The year's over. As a teacher, I'm like, I'm done. But at graduation that night, everybody gets, you know, melancholy and sentimental. And man, I've had kids hug me and they don't want to let go. And you've had it too. I know you have. And that too, you know, after 4 years, and sometimes those kids were ones that you really gave you a hard time. And sometimes there were kids that you looked for them walking in your door. But that always is something too, man. When you get that, that's an awesome feeling as well. So
I 100% agree. And if I could just follow up with something personal there, like I've always been impressed with your ability to um, just recall these folk songs and play them so well. And I'm just like, God, like he's so great at that. Like I'm always impressed with that. Now, so maybe like not the 10 questions here, but like, are those songs that you would look up and research, or were they taught to you from somebody?
It's a mix of both, I think. Some are ones that I actually went out and learned. Then there's other ones that I've been hearing my whole life that just stick. Yeah. I don't know. Music and jokes. Like Chris and I did a gig on Friday night. And, you know, we have I might have 100 jokes at the ready for these types of shows. And, but there's some that I don't tell forever. And we're sitting at dinner before we got up on stage and Chris said, hey, you should tell that cat joke. And I just look at him, I'm like, cat joke? What cat joke? And Chris just had to give me one line from it. And the joke was there. Like I was able to recall the whole joke with the punchline and delivery. I don't know where that skill comes from. It's the same way with songs. I don't know. It's just one of my gifts, I guess. But
I'm always impressed by it. I like, you know, when you guys have your show, I'm just like, this is awesome. Like, yeah, I'm always impressed with that. All right. Okay. What tattoo would you get, and where would you get it?
So I do not have any tattoos, and I really don't have any plans of getting any. That was kind of like, and I think that's kind of like baggage from my dad, because my dad was like, never getting a tattoo. Well, you can't get a tattoo, blah, blah. And that's in the back of my mind. And that's okay. I mean, I have nothing against tattoos. But if I had to get a tattoo, I would get our family's hex sign, and I would probably get it on my, around my, on my butt cheek,
okay,
for sure.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Distal think on the left cheek and the hex sign on the right cheek.
You know what? We're joking, but that would be a great one. That'd be awesome.
That would.
All right, so I have. Let's see here. Oh, okay. I have three more. I got one more good one, and then I got one it's going to be pretty heavy, and then I got one that's just absolutely absurd. So,
all right, yeah, that's good. Go for the sandwich mode right here. Good, yes, good, deep, so, good. Gotcha.
So you're one of the. It's amazing the food that we have talked about and the cooking that you do and things like that. And Jen has made comments because she's a huge cook and foodie and stuff like that. And we've spoken many times about food, and I don't think I've ever asked you this question, but what is your favorite food?
It's tough. It's like, what's your favorite child, right? So I've often joked with Jess, like, if I was ever on death row and they're like, what's your last meal? You get to pick your last meal, right? And I've often thought about, I don't know why I think about that, but if I knew that I was just going to have one more chance to eat something, what would it be? And this is a total Pennsylvania Dutch family answer, but corn pie has always been kind of like my knee-jerk reaction. There's nothing that says like home more to me than a slice of warm corn pie. It was one of my mom's favorite dishes. I think that's part of it for me. So I think that would definitely be on the table, or just like a traditional Pennsylvania Dutch meal. So potato filling with good gravy, some kind of roasted meat, whether it was beef or turkey or chicken, dried corn. Yeah, I think corn pie would have to be. I mean, that's really high on my list. It's a simple, it's one of these like it's just a simple meal. It's nothing fancy at all. But it's when you talk about like complete comfort food, for me, that's comfort food. So
That's good. Yeah. Yeah, I remember you posted. Yeah, I mean, I think you post about that at least once a year.
although,
Yeah.
I usually in corn's in, but I will say I'll give one other answer to this. So you know, and a lot of the people know listening to this that I travel to Germany quite a bit, and one of my absolute favorite things to get in Germany, like anytime I go, I can't the trip is not complete unless I have a doner kebab, which is this Turkish sandwich that you can get in Germany, and they're everywhere, and they are cheap, but they are so delicious, and I've never found one really worth anything here in the United States. Maybe they're out there, I just haven't found them yet. But that's really high on my list of like top 10 or top 5 foods for sure as well. Doner kebab.
I
So,
want to ask you more about that when we're off.
well, when you and I do our brewery tour of Germany, we'll be living off of those things for sure.
That sounds wonderful. All right, well, that's actually a good segue into this next question, and I will be completely transparent. I actually called your wife about this question as well because I wanted
Oh
to get her
my
insight on it.
gosh.
So, yeah. So, Doug, if you could have one more conversation with your mom, what would you guys talk about? What would be some things that you bring up?
Oh, come on, man. Oh, jeez. Well, I'd introduce her to her grandchildren. That's been really hard for me to watch them grow up and them to never meet her. They've seen pictures of her and they've seen some home videos of her, but to never have met her. And I would definitely like introduce her to her grandkids. And then I would have to joke with my mom because that's all I ever did. I'll tell you this. I've told very few people have told this story. I've told this story to. Well, now I'm going to tell it to a lot of people. But when the last time I saw her before she passed away, she was not good. I mean, the cancer was really bad. She had hardly any energy. And we had her in a hospital bed there in the back room of the farm. And I rode down because I was leaving on a trip with high school kids to Germany in like 2 days. And I was told like she's not gonna make it very long. So I went home to say goodbye to her. And I walk in the back room there and she's in bed and she looked at me, but man, she hardly had energy. And what do you say in that moment? And so I sat down next to her and it was quiet for a while. And before I could make a joke, she turned to me and said, "Well, are you going to say anything or are we just going to sit here and be quiet the whole time?" Before I could even say it, well, it crushed me, when she said it. And I had to laugh a little bit, but, I think I'd like to go back to that conversation, or I'd like to finish that conversation because she was really weak and we talked for a little bit. But I didn't say half the things that I wanted to say to her because I couldn't, in that moment. So she knows I talk to her every day. So yeah, it's a tough question, man. Thanks.
Yeah.
That's good though.
Yeah. 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 That was a good story, man. That was, yeah, you had never told me that story. That's nice. And one of the reasons why I wanted to ask that is because, man, you're such a great dude, and that kind of just speaks volumes about your character, as everything else that you do. And anyway, thank you for fielding that one.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to go to the other end of the spectrum here, and this is the last question.
Okay.
And I came up with this question completely on my own. I have researched some of these, and I was testing these on some other people and stuff. But this one's 100% mine. So you lost a bet, and you have to wear a woman's bathing suit to either a beach or a pool. Are you going with a 1-piece or a 2-piece?
What do you think my answer is going to be?
You're going to go with a 2-piece.
You're damn right. Come on, that's a
no-brainer. 100%. Yeah, that's.
It would either be that. It would either be that or that thing that Borat wore, that like banana hammock thing that goes up over my shoulders.
Yes, yeah, and we're not trimming beforehand either. We're letting it all grow for months. We're going full on bush everywhere.
I think in French they say "au natural," and that's
there you go. Yeah.
I'd do that even if I didn't lose a bet. So
no, it would be fun. Yeah, couple head turns. Yeah.
Who's that dude?
Yeah.
Oh,
Who's
man.
that lady? Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's all my questions, ladies and
Oh,
gentlemen. I hope that you guys got some good stuff out of that about our friend Doug here. And I'll just add that this wonderful human has personally helped me through some dark times, and everything from laughter to tears, and man, what a great guy you are, and Jesus, I'm not a overly religious person, but I do thank whatever higher power is out there than I am, that I'm lucky enough to know you,
oh, man.
and have
Well,
you in my life. So
no, absolutely the same. I repeat everything you just said. Hey, when I started this podcast 5 years ago, who was the very first interview?
some handsome
Some
dummy.
hand, some
Yeah,
I'm looking
yeah,
right at him, baby. I'm looking
yeah,
right at him.
yeah.
No, I really appreciate you doing this. The questions were great. You came at me from left field a couple times. That's what I knew if anyone was going to do this right, it was going to be you. So
Yeah. Well,
you always deliver.
I did put some work into this, and
I
like
believe
I said,
it.
I wanted to make sure that these were going to be good ones. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah, they were good. Absolutely, my friend. Thank you so much for doing this and being part of this 100th episode. It really means a lot.
absolutely, man. And like I said, it's a great podcast, and everybody's a better person for listening to it.
Well, that's our hope. That's our hope.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, dear friends. That brings us to the end of the 100th episode of Doug's Front Porch. When I started this podcast back in 2020, I never had a goal of reaching 100 episodes. I didn't even know if we'd make it to 10 episodes. But for the last 5 years, this has brought me much joy. To interview friends, old and new. I've met a lot of really great people through the podcast that I never would have known had it not been for the podcast. And I was also able to ask questions to people that I've known my whole life that I never had the answers for. This has given me that opportunity. I hope you've enjoyed the 100 episodes that we've produced so far, and we look forward to continuing and moving forward. I already have a bunch of episodes recorded for the rest of 2025, and we're going to keep going. Are we going to make 200? I don't know, but we're going to try. We're going to keep those conversations coming because I truly believe that as a society and as a country and as a world, we need to talk to each other. And the moment we stop doing that and the moment we stop listening to each other, then we are in for some really bad times. So I will keep bringing you episodes of me sitting down with wonderful people on my front porch, of course, digitally, of course, on the first of every month. But I would like to thank all of you for journeying along with me over the first 100 because your support and your continual clicks and downloads has meant a lot to me to know that the podcast is being enjoyed and consumed and shared with other people too. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for 100 episodes of you traveling along with me, and I look forward to traveling further with you to the next 100. Take care, dear friends. Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Madenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Your ratings and reviews will help others find the show. You can follow along on Facebook, X, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. If you would like to financially support our endeavors, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. I thank you in advance for any contributions. Please feel free to tell all your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on my front porch.